The day my parents sued me for my own house. I never thought I would see my own mother in a courtroom pointing her finger at me and demanding I hand over the keys to my house. The house I bought with my own money. The house I saved for since I was 15 years old. But there she was sitting next to my father and my younger sister Chelsea, all three of them looking at me like I was the villain in their story. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. And if you've ever dealt with toxic family dynamics, drop a comment below, because you're going to relate to every word of this. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare actually began. The keys felt cold and heavy in my hand as I stood in the empty living room of my new house. My house. I ran my fingers along the smooth walls, still smelling faintly of fresh paint from where the previous owners had touched things up before closing. 28 years old, and I had finally done it. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard with actual grass, and a neighborhood where people waved at each other in the mornings. This was not just a house. This was proof that every sacrifice, every missed party, every night of instant ramen had been worth it. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, wanting to capture this moment before the movers arrived with my furniture. That's when I saw the missed calls. 7 of them, all from my mother. My stomach dropped in that familiar way it always did when I saw her name on my screen too many times. Nothing good ever came from my mother calling me repeatedly. I sat down on the hardwood floor, my back against the wall, and called her back. "Madison," she said, her voice sharp and clipped. "We need to talk. Your father and I are very disappointed in you." Here we go, I thought. I had known this conversation was coming ever since I told her 3 months ago that I had been approved for a mortgage. I pressed the phone closer to my ear and tried to keep my voice steady. "What's wrong, Mom? You know exactly what's wrong. You went ahead and bought that house even after we explicitly told you to wait. Do you have any idea how selfish you're being right now?" I closed my eyes and counted to 5 before responding. "Mom, we've been over this. I've been saving for this house for years. The timing was right. I got a great interest rate, and the neighborhood is exactly what I was looking for. The timing is not right, Madison. Your sister needs help. She's going through a very difficult period right now. And instead of being there for your family, you're off spending money on yourself like some kind of entitled brat." I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest, hot and suffocating. Chelsea was not going through a difficult period. Chelsea was 24 years old and had just dropped out of college for the 3rd time. She had moved back into our parents' house 6 months ago after her latest boyfriend, the one who had been paying her rent, finally realized she had no intention of ever getting a job. My parents had welcomed her back with open arms, set her up in her old bedroom, and immediately began a campaign to convince me that I needed to help support her. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "Chelsea is an adult. She needs to figure out her own life. I can't keep putting my future on hold because she refuses to take responsibility for hers." That's easy for you to say when you've had everything handed to you. I actually laughed out loud at that. Everything handed to me. I had started working when I was 15 years old, lying to my manager about my availability so I could pick up extra shifts. I can still remember that first job interview at a burger place downtown. The manager asked me if I could work weekends, and I said yes before he even finished the question. I needed that job more than anything. While my classmates were going to football games and hanging out at the mall, I was flipping burgers and mopping floors. My first paycheck was $142. I deposited $100 into a savings account I had opened specifically for my future house fund. The remaining $42 went toward gas, and the cheap phone I used for work. By 16, I had added a second job at a grocery store. Weekend mornings at the grocery store, afternoons and evenings at the burger place, somehow fitting homework in between. I calculated once that during my junior year of high school, I was working an average of 35 hours a week while taking a full course load. My guidance counselor called my mother in for a meeting concerned about my grueling schedule. My mother told her I was just very ambitious. She did not mention that Chelsea, who was 13 at the time, was getting piano lessons, dance classes, and a clothing allowance that exceeded my monthly income. I had worked 2 jobs all through high school, while Chelsea got driven to cheerleading practice and had her college applications filled out by a private tutor our parents paid for. I remember the day Chelsea got her acceptance letter to the state university. My parents threw a party, invited the whole family, ordered a cake with her name on it. When I got accepted to community college, my mother said that's nice, and went back to planning Chelsea's dorm room decor. I had put myself through community college while working 40 hours a week at a medical supply warehouse. The warehouse job paid better than fast food, but it was hard physical labor, loading and unloading boxes, inventory management, early morning shifts that started at 5 a.m. I took classes in the evenings, usually getting home around 10 p.m. doing homework until midnight, then starting all over again the next day. It took me 3 years to finish a 2-year degree because I could only afford part-time enrollment. Meanwhile, Chelsea had gone to the state university with our parents covering every single expense, only to drop out 3 times because she could not find her passion. Her first dropout came after 1 semester. She said the other students were too competitive, and it stressed her out. My parents brought her home, let her rest for 6 months, then enrolled her again. The second time, she lasted a full year before deciding her major was not right for her. She switched from business to art history, then to psychology, then back to business. By the time she dropped out the 3rd time, she had accumulated credits in 5 different majors and completed none of them. My parents paid for all of it, every tuition payment, every dorm room, every meal plan, every time. They never once suggested that maybe Chelsea should get a job or contribute financially. When I asked them why they never helped me with school, my father said I had never asked. I had not asked because I had learned early that asking for help meant being told no, while watching Chelsea receive things she had not even requested. But sure, everything had been handed to me. I need to go, Mom. The movers are going to be here soon, Madison and Parker. You listen to me. Your sister deserves that house more than you do. She's been through so much, and you've always had it easy. We're coming over to talk to you tomorrow evening, and you better be there. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there on the floor of my empty living room, staring at my phone, and feeling that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and somehow my mother had managed to turn it into another guilt trip about Chelsea. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Chelsea. Heard you bought a house. Must be nice having Mommy and Daddy's money to throw around. Some of us actually have to work for what we have. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Chelsea had not worked a full-time job in her entire life. The longest she had ever held employment was 4 months at a boutique downtown, a job she quit because her manager expected her to actually show up on time. But somehow, in the twisted logic of my family, I was the one who had everything handed to me. I did not respond to her text. I had learned years ago that engaging with Chelsea only fed her victim narrative. Instead, I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and walked through my house again. This house that I had earned. This house that belonged entirely to me. The next few weeks passed in a blur of unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and slowly making the house feel like home. I painted the guest bedroom a soft blue color that reminded me of the ocean. I hung up photographs and artwork I had been collecting for years. I bought plants and actually managed to keep them alive. Every night I came home from my job as a logistics coordinator and felt a surge of pride when I pulled into my driveway. This was mine. No one could take this away from me. Except apparently my parents were going to try. The confrontation came on a Thursday evening. I had just gotten home from work and was changing into comfortable clothes when I heard the doorbell ring. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother, my father, and Chelsea standing on my front porch. My mother was holding a folder stuffed with papers. My father had his arms crossed and wore the same stern expression he used whenever he was about to lecture me about responsibility. Chelsea stood slightly behind them, her phone in her hand, probably texting her friends about how her terrible sister refused to share. I considered not answering. I had this fantasy of just staying perfectly quiet until they gave up and left. But I knew my mother. She would stand out there ringing the doorbell until my neighbors called the police. So I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. "Mom, Dad, Chelsea," I said, not bothering to fake a smile. "What can I do for you?" "We need to talk," my mother said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. My father and Chelsea followed, and suddenly my sanctuary felt invaded. They stood in my living room, looking around with expressions that ranged from disapproval to barely concealed envy. Chelsea walked over to my bookshelf and picked up a framed photograph of me and my best friend Rebecca at the Grand Canyon. We had taken that trip 6 months ago, my first real vacation in 3 years. "Nice picture," Chelsea said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Must be nice to afford trips to Arizona while your family struggles." I took the photograph from her hands and placed it back on the shelf. "Chelsea, our parents pay for everything you need. You're not struggling. You're living rent-free in their house." "That's enough," my father said sharply. "We're not here to argue. We're here to discuss a solution to a very serious family problem." I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall. "What problem?" My mother opened her folder and pulled out a stack of papers. She held them out to me like they were some kind of evidence in a trial. "Madison, your sister has been having a very difficult time adjusting to adult life. Your father and I have been doing our best to support her, but we can't do it alone anymore. We're not getting any younger, and we need to make sure Chelsea has security for her future. Okay?" I said slowly, not taking the papers. "What does that have to do with me?" "This house," my mother said, gesturing around my living room. "Chelsea needs this house more than you do. You're young, you have a good job, you can always rent an apartment. But Chelsea needs stability. She needs a place that's truly hers, where she can finally settle down and find her path." I actually laughed. I could not help it. The absurdity of what she was suggesting was so overwhelming that laughter was my only response. "You think I should give Chelsea my house, the house I saved for and bought with my own money?" "We're not asking you to give it to her," my father said, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he always used when he was about to say something completely unreasonable. "We're asking you to transfer the deed to Chelsea's name. We'll help her with the mortgage payments until she gets on her feet. It's the right thing to do for family." The papers my mother was holding turned out to be some kind of legal document they had drawn up. I took them from her hands and skimmed through the dense legal language. They wanted me to sign over my house to Chelsea. Just like that. As if the past 10 years of sacrifice meant nothing. As if the countless nights I had worked overtime, the vacations I had skipped, the social events I had missed, all of it was just practice for this moment when I would hand everything over to my younger sister because she needed it more. I looked at the document more carefully. It was professionally drawn up, probably costing them a few $100s at least. They had actually gone to a lawyer and paid money to create paperwork designed to steal my house. The document outlined a transfer of property listing Chelsea as the new owner and me as basically a temporary placeholder who had purchased the property on her behalf. It even included language about how this had been the understanding from the beginning, a complete fabrication, that they apparently expected me to just go along with. "I'm not signing this," I said, dropping the papers on my coffee table. "This is my house. I bought it with my own money. Chelsea is not getting it." My mother's face hardened. "Madison, you're being selfish. Your sister has been struggling while you've had every advantage. The least you can do is help her now that you have the means." "Every advantage? I started working when I was 15 years old, Mom. I paid for my own car. I put myself through school. I saved every penny I could for years so I could afford a down payment on this house. Chelsea got a new car for her 16th birthday. You paid for her college not once, but 3 times. You've given her thousands of dollars over the years to support her lifestyle. Don't talk to me about advantages." "That's different," my father said. "Chelsea has always been more sensitive. She needs more support than you do. You've always been independent. You can handle things on your own." And there it was, the core truth of my family dynamics laid bare in my living room. I was being punished for being competent. Because I had learned to take care of myself, because I did not crumble every time life got difficult, because I actually worked hard and made responsible decisions. I was expected to sacrifice everything for my sister, who had learned that crying and playing the victim would always earn her whatever she wanted. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "I'm not discussing this anymore. This house is mine, and that's not changing." My mother's eyes filled with tears, a manipulation tactic I had seen 1,000 times. "How can you be so cruel? I'm your mother. I raised you. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me. You need to leave," I repeated, walking to the front door and opening it. "Now?" They left, but not before my mother informed me that I was making a terrible mistake and would regret my selfishness. Chelsea called me several creative names on her way out. My father just shook his head in disappointment, as if I had failed some fundamental test of character. I closed the door behind them and stood in my living room shaking with anger and adrenaline. I had known my family was dysfunctional. I had known they played favorites, but I had never imagined they would actually try to take my house away from me. That I thought was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I came home from work to find a legal document taped to my front door. I pulled it down and read the heading with a sense of growing disbelief. My parents were suing me. They were actually taking me to court, claiming that I had verbally agreed to purchase the house for Chelsea and was now refusing to honor that agreement. The lawsuit claimed I had defrauded my sister out of her rightful property and demanded that the court force me to transfer the deed to Chelsea's name. I sat down on my front steps and read through the entire document. It was a work of creative fiction. According to the lawsuit, I had approached my parents 6 months ago and asked them to co-sign on a mortgage so Chelsea could have a house. They had supposedly agreed, understanding that the house was always meant for Chelsea and that my name was only on the mortgage temporarily. Now I was refusing to complete the transfer and was essentially stealing property that rightfully belonged to my sister. None of it was true. Not a single word. My parents had not co-signed anything. I had qualified for the mortgage entirely on my own. The house had always been for me. I had never made any agreement about Chelsea. But they were suing me anyway, apparently convinced that they could force a judge to give them what they wanted. I called my best friend Rebecca that evening. She worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown and had been following the drama with my family for years. When I told her about the lawsuit, she was silent for a long moment. "Madison," she finally said, "you need to get a lawyer, like immediately. This is serious." "But it's all lies," I protested. "None of what they're claiming is true. The judge will see that. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. They filed a lawsuit. You need to respond properly, and you need legal representation. Let me talk to some of the attorneys at my firm and see if anyone can take your case." By the end of the week, I had met with a lawyer named Catherine Morrison. She was in her early 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. She read through the lawsuit, carefully asked me detailed questions about my relationship with my family, and reviewed all my financial documents, proving that I had purchased the house entirely on my own. "This is one of the more ridiculous cases I've seen," she said bluntly, "but that doesn't mean we can take it lightly. Your parents are claiming a verbal agreement, which is difficult to prove or disprove. We need to build a strong case showing your financial independence, your lack of any agreement with them, and their pattern of favoritism toward your sister." Over the next few months, Catherine and I built that case. It became like a second job. Every evening after work, I would go through old documents, bank statements, emails, text messages, anything that could prove my side of the story. We gathered bank statements showing my steady savings pattern going back years. Catherine was meticulous about the documentation. She wanted to see every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer. We created a spreadsheet that tracked my savings from age 15 to 28. The numbers told a clear story. Small deposits at first $20 here, $50 there from my fast food job, then larger amounts as I moved to better paying positions. Tax returns showing consistent employment and income growth. We collected pay stubs proving my income. I had kept everything, thank God. Every single pay stub from every job I had ever worked. The warehouse, the grocery store, the burger place, all of it. Catherine laid them out chronologically and photographed them as evidence. We documented every major purchase I had made, showing that I had always been financially independent. My car purchase at 19 paid in full with money I had saved. My laptop for school, bought refurbished to save money. Every expense tracked and accounted for, showing a pattern of financial responsibility and independence. We even found text messages and emails where I had explicitly told my parents I was house hunting for myself with no mention of Chelsea. I had sent my mother pictures of houses I was considering. In every message I used words like my house, my mortgage, my down payment. Never once had I suggested this was for Chelsea. Catherine printed out dozens of these messages and organized them by date. Catherine also suggested we document the pattern of preferential treatment Chelsea had received. This was harder emotionally, going through old family photos, old emails, old receipts, seeing the stark difference in how my parents treated us. We gathered evidence of the car my parents had bought her, a brand new Honda Civic, for her 16th birthday. I found the paperwork in some old family files showing they had paid $18,000 cash. Meanwhile, I had bought my own car at 19 with money I had saved for 2 years, a 10-year-old Toyota with high mileage that I drove until the wheels nearly fell off. The college tuition they had paid multiple times. Catherine subpoenaed my parents' bank records, which showed regular tuition payments to the state university. Semester after semester, year after year, even after Chelsea had dropped out twice before. The credit card debt they had covered when she maxed out her cards, buying designer clothes. $7,000 in one instance, $4,000 in another. The credit card companies had copies of all the payment records. My parents had paid off Chelsea's debts 3 separate times. We compiled a timeline of Chelsea's various failed ventures and my parents' financial support for each one. The boutique job she quit after 4 months. The online business selling handmade jewelry that lasted 2 weeks. The food blog that never got past 3 posts. The attempt at becoming a social media influencer that required my parents to buy her a new phone and ring light. For each venture, we documented the financial support my parents had provided and the complete lack of return on their investment. Catherine also interviewed Rebecca, who had witnessed years of family dynamics and could testify to the favoritism if needed. We prepared questions about specific incidents she had witnessed. The time my parents bought Chelsea a trip to Europe for graduation, even though she had not actually graduated. The time I had to skip Rebecca's wedding because I could not afford the time off work, while Chelsea was on vacation number 3 that year, funded entirely by our parents. The time my mother had told Rebecca right in front of me that Chelsea was the creative one, and I was just practical. Meanwhile, my family was apparently doing their own preparation. I found out later from Uncle Marcus that they had hired a private investigator to look into my finances. They were searching for any evidence that I could not actually afford the house, that I must have received secret help from someone, anything that would support their claim that the house should go to Chelsea. The investigator found nothing, of course, because there was nothing to find. My mother called me repeatedly, alternating between tearful pleas for me to drop my defense and angry accusations that I was tearing the family apart. One voicemail, which I saved as evidence, had her sobbing about how I was killing her with stress and that she might not survive to see this case resolved. Another voicemail left 20 minutes after the crying one had her screaming about what an ungrateful, selfish daughter I was, and how I would rot in hell for what I was doing to my sister. Catherine added both voicemails to our evidence file. Chelsea posted vague messages on social media about betrayal and greed. Things like some people will do anything for money, even destroy their own family. And blessed are those who remain loyal when others show their true colors. Her friends and followers had no context, so they left sympathetic comments about how sorry they were. She was going through something difficult. If they had known the full story, I wondered if they would have been so supportive. My father sent me long emails explaining how disappointed he was in the person I had become. One email was 5 pages long, single-spaced, detailing every perceived slight and selfish action I had committed since childhood. According to him, I had always been cold, calculating, and self-centered. He conveniently left out every sacrifice I had made, every time I had worked, instead of played every dollar I had saved instead of spent. Catherine read the email and actually laughed. "This is gold," she said. "He's basically admitting that he's always seen you as the responsible one and resented you for it." I blocked their numbers. I unfollowed them on social media. I focused on work on my house and on the few relationships I had that were actually healthy and supportive. Rebecca came over most weekends helping me paint walls and assemble furniture, never once suggesting that I should just give in to keep the peace. She brought wine, ordered pizza, and listened when I needed to vent about the latest manipulation attempt from my family. One evening, about 2 months before the trial, I broke down completely. Rebecca found me sitting on my kitchen floor, surrounded by old family photos, crying so hard I could barely breathe. "What if I'm wrong?" I asked her. "What if I really am selfish? What if giving her the house is the right thing to do?" Rebecca sat down next to me on the floor and took my hands. "Madison, listen to me. You worked for everything you have. You saved for years. You made sacrifices your sister has never made. Keeping what you earned is not selfish. Letting them steal it from you would be insane. But they're my family," I said. "So what family doesn't get to abuse you just because you share DNA? You don't owe them your house. You don't owe them anything." That conversation kept me going through the hardest parts of the preparation. Whenever I doubted myself, whenever the guilt threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered Rebecca's words. "You don't owe them anything." The trial date arrived on a cold morning in February. I had barely slept the night before, running through Catherine's advice over and over in my head. Stay calm. Answer questions directly. Don't let them bait you into anger. Let the facts speak for themselves. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in the professional outfit Catherine had suggested. A navy blue suit that made me look competent and serious. My parents and Chelsea were already there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom. My mother was crying into a tissue. My father had his arm around Chelsea, who looked pale and tragic, dressed in a simple black dress like she was attending a funeral. They did not acknowledge me when I walked past. Catherine arrived a few minutes later, carrying a briefcase full of documents. She squeezed my shoulder briefly, a gesture of support, then led me into the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Reynolds. She had a reputation, Catherine had told me, for having no patience with frivolous lawsuits and family manipulation. That was good news for us, but it also meant she would be strict and demanding with both sides. The hearing began with my parents' attorney laying out their case. He was a young guy, probably fresh out of law school, who seemed nervous and over-rehearsed. He claimed that I had approached my parents with a plan to purchase a house for Chelsea, that they had supported this plan financially and emotionally, and that I was now refusing to honor my commitment. Judge Reynolds listened impassively, occasionally making notes. When the attorney finished, she looked up and asked a simple question. "Do you have any written documentation of this agreement? Any emails, text messages, or contracts showing that Miss Parker agreed to purchase this property for her sister?" The attorney shuffled through his papers. "We have testimony from my clients regarding verbal conversations. So no written documentation," Judge Reynolds said. It was not a question. The attorney called my father to the stand first. My father, who had always been so confident and authoritative at home, looked smaller somehow in the witness box. He testified that I had come to him 6 months before buying the house and said I wanted to help Chelsea get established. He claimed I had specifically said the house would be for her. Catherine stood up for cross-examination. She was calm, professional, and absolutely devastating. "Mr. Parker, did your daughter ask you to co-sign on the mortgage?" My father hesitated. "No, but we thought it was understood." "So she qualified for the mortgage entirely on her own?" "Yes." "Did she ever put Chelsea's name on any of the paperwork?" "No, but we thought that would come later." Catherine pulled out a folder. "I'm going to show you several text messages from your daughter sent during the time she was house hunting." She marked them as evidence and handed copies to the judge. These messages clearly state that she is looking for a house for herself. She discusses her budget, her preferred neighborhoods, and her excitement about becoming a homeowner. Not once does she mention purchasing property for Chelsea. "Can you explain that?" My father stared at the messages. He had no explanation. Catherine then presented my financial records, showing years of careful saving. She walked through my employment history, my salary increases, my responsible spending habits. She showed that I had never relied on my parents for financial support after turning 18. Then she called me to the stand. I was nervous, my hands sweating, but I focused on Catherine's advice. "Tell the truth. Stay calm. Don't let them make you angry, Miss Parker." Catherine began. "Can you explain your relationship with your sister, Chelsea?" I took a breath and told the truth. "My sister and I have very different approaches to life. I've always believed in working hard and being financially independent. Chelsea has always expected our parents to support her. Our parents have enabled that expectation by consistently giving her money and support without requiring her to contribute anything in return. And did you ever agree to purchase this house for your sister? Never. The house was always meant to be mine. I saved for it for years. I never discussed purchasing property for Chelsea with anyone. Why do you think your parents are making these claims?" I looked directly at my mother, who was sitting in the gallery with tears running down her face. "Because they've always put Chelsea's wants ahead of my needs. Because they think I should sacrifice my future to support her lifestyle. Because they can't accept that I have boundaries and won't let them manipulate me anymore." The parents' attorney tried to make me seem cold and selfish during his cross-examination, but I stuck to the facts. Yes, I had been financially successful. Yes, I had purchased a house. Yes, I refused to give that house to my sister. None of that was wrong. None of that was illegal. None of that justified their lawsuit. Chelsea testified next, and it was difficult to watch. She cried through most of her testimony, claiming that I had always been jealous of her, and that buying this house was my way of flaunting my success. She said she had always dreamed of having a house like mine, and that I knew how much it would hurt her when I bought it. She made herself out to be the victim of my cruelty, and for a moment I wondered if the judge might actually believe her. But then Catherine asked her a simple question. Ms. Parker, how much money have your parents given you over the past 5 years to support your various endeavors? Chelsea's lawyer objected, but Judge Reynolds allowed the question. Chelsea stammered out an answer that was clearly a substantial underestimate. Catherine then presented bank records that my mother had been forced to provide during discovery. The actual number was over $80,000. Tuition payments, rent payments, car repairs, credit card bills, shopping sprees, all of it funded by our parents. And how much money has your sister received from your parents during that same time period? Catherine asked. Chelsea stared at her lap. I don't know. According to your parents' own records provided during discovery, the total amount they gave to your sister Madison over the past 5 years was $0. Does that sound accurate, I guess? Chelsea whispered. After all the testimony was complete, Judge Reynolds called for a short recess. Catherine and I sat in the hallway while my family huddled together on the other side of the room. I felt numb, exhausted, like I had just run a marathon. Catherine kept checking her watch and making notes in her legal pad. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Reynolds looked stern. She shuffled through the papers on her desk, then looked up at both parties. I have reviewed all the evidence presented in this case, she began. I have listened carefully to all testimony, and I'm going to be very direct here. This lawsuit is without merit. Miss Madison Parker purchased a home with her own money using her own credit and has full legal ownership of that property. There is no written agreement, no verbal contract that can be substantiated, and no legal basis whatsoever for transferring that property to her sister. My mother made a small gasping sound. The judge continued, her voice getting sharper. Furthermore, I find the behavior of the plaintiffs in this case to be troubling. From the evidence presented, it's clear that there has been a long-standing pattern of financial favoritism toward one daughter while expecting the other daughter to sacrifice her own success to support her sister. That is not how family relationships should work, and it's certainly not something this court will endorse by forcing a property transfer. She looked directly at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, your daughter Madison has worked hard to achieve financial independence. She has demonstrated responsibility, foresight, and maturity. Instead of celebrating her success, you have attempted to take it away and give it to her sister, who, by your own admission, has struggled with financial responsibility. That is deeply unfair, and frankly, it's a disservice to both of your daughters. The case is dismissed. Ms. Madison Parker will retain full ownership of her property. The plaintiffs will be responsible for all court costs, including the defendant's legal fees. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire courtroom. I sat there, stunned. Catherine was smiling, gathering her papers. On the other side of the room, my mother was sobbing openly. My father's face was red, whether from anger or embarrassment, I could not tell. Chelsea was staring at me with an expression of pure hatred. We stood and walked out of the courtroom. My family did not follow us. I did not look back. Outside, the sun was shining. It was one of those perfect February days in Dallas, cool, but not cold, with a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Catherine turned to me and extended her hand. Congratulations, she said. You won. I shook her hand, but I did not feel like I had won anything. I had successfully defended my right to keep my own house, something that should never have been in question. The cost had been a relationship with my parents and my sister, though I was not sure that relationship had been worth saving in the first place. Thank you, I said, for everything. You did the hard part. You stood up for yourself. A lot of people in your situation would have just given in to keep the peace. I thought about that as I drove home to my house, the house that was definitely legally, permanently mine. Had I won, Or had I just successfully defended what was always rightfully mine against people who had no claim to it? The answer, I decided, did not really matter. What mattered was that I had drawn a line. I had refused to sacrifice my future for people who would never appreciate it. I had protected what I had built through years of hard work and sacrifice. My parents never apologized. Within weeks of the trial, they had rewritten the narrative in their own minds. I was the ungrateful daughter who had betrayed her family. They told relatives that I had sued them, twisting the story completely around. Some family members believed their version. Others, who had witnessed years of the same dysfunction, reached out to tell me they supported my decision. My uncle Marcus, my father's brother, called me 2 weeks after the trial. I was not close with him. We saw each other maybe once a year at family gatherings, but he had always seemed to see through my parents' favoritism. Madison, he said, I wanted you to know that I think you did the right thing. Your father called me yesterday, trying to get me to convince you to give Chelsea the house. I told him he was out of his mind. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. It was the first time anyone in my family had validated my decision. Thank you, Uncle Marcus. That means a lot. Your parents have been enabling Chelsea her entire life. Somebody needed to stand up and say enough. I'm proud of you, kid. After that conversation, I felt lighter somehow. The knot of anxiety that had been sitting in my chest for months began to loosen. I had made the right decision. I knew that intellectually, but hearing it from someone else, especially someone from my family, made it feel more real. Life slowly returned to normal. Or rather, life became better than it had ever been before. I continued working at my job, earning promotions and salary increases that let me pay down my mortgage ahead of schedule. My boss, who had been understanding about the time I needed off for court appearances, gave me a substantial raise 6 months after the trial. She said it was based on performance, but I think she also respected how I had handled the family crisis without letting it affect my work. I renovated the guest bathroom, replacing the old fixtures with modern ones. I spent weeks choosing the perfect tiles, a soft gray subway tile that made the small space feel bigger and brighter. I installed a new vanity, replaced the old toilet, and added a rainfall showerhead that made every morning feel like a spa experience. The total cost was $3,000, money I could now spend without guilt, because I was not being pressured to give it to Chelsea. I planted a vegetable garden in the backyard and discovered I actually enjoyed growing my own tomatoes and peppers. There was something deeply satisfying about nurturing plants from seeds to harvest. I started small, just a few tomato plants and some bell peppers. By the end of summer, I was harvesting enough vegetables to share with neighbors. Mrs. Henderson next door taught me how to can tomatoes, and I spent a weekend making homemade salsa. It was the kind of simple, peaceful activity I had never had time for when I was working multiple jobs and dealing with family drama. Rebecca and I took a weekend trip to New Orleans, my first vacation in over a year. We stayed in a small hotel in the French Quarter, ate beignets for breakfast every morning, and spent our days exploring the city. We listened to jazz music in the streets, took a steamboat ride on the Mississippi River, and ate so much good food that I had to buy new jeans when I got home. One evening, sitting on a balcony overlooking Bourbon Street, Rebecca raised her glass of wine in a toast. To Madison, she said, who fought for herself and won. We ate beignets, listened to jazz music in the French Quarter, and I realized I was genuinely happy. Not happy despite my family situation, but happy because I had removed their toxic influence from my life. The difference was profound. I had not realized how much energy I had been spending on managing their expectations, defending my choices, and feeling guilty about my success. Without that weight, I felt lighter, freer, more myself than I had been in years. I adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Cooper, who had been found abandoned on the side of a highway. The shelter told me he was about 3 years old and had been abused by his previous owners. He was scared of everything, Loud noises, sudden movements, even his own shadow sometimes. He had trust issues and separation anxiety, and I related to both of those things. We worked through his problems together, slowly building trust. The first few weeks were rough. Cooper would not eat unless I sat next to his food bowl. He would shake uncontrollably during thunderstorms. He would panic if I left the house for more than an hour. But gradually, with patience and consistency, he learned that he was safe, that his home was permanent, that I was not going to abandon him. Watching Cooper heal from his trauma helped me recognize my own healing process. We were both learning to trust again, to feel safe, to believe that good things could last. By 6 months after adoption, Cooper was a different dog. He greeted me with excitement when I came home, wagging his entire body with joy. He slept peacefully through storms, curled up at the foot of my bed. He no longer panicked when I left for work, confident that I would return. Sometimes late at night, I would think about my parents and Chelsea. I wondered if they had learned anything from the lawsuit, or if they continued their pattern of enabling and manipulation. Through Uncle Marcus, I heard bits and pieces. My parents had apparently become even more isolated from the extended family. At Thanksgiving, only 2 relatives showed up at their house, down from the usual 20 or so. Chelsea had started dating a new guy, someone she met online, who lived 3 states away. Within a month, she was talking about moving to be with him, convinced he was her soulmate. My parents were encouraging the relationship, probably hoping he would take over the financial responsibility of supporting her. I wondered if Chelsea would ever develop real independence, or if she would spend her life looking for someone to support her. The pattern seemed so ingrained, so reinforced by years of my parents enabling, that I could not imagine her changing without some major intervention. I wondered if my parents would ever realize how much damage they had done by always putting Chelsea's wants above my needs. Probably not. People like my parents rarely achieved that level of self-awareness. It was easier to blame me, to paint me as the selfish daughter who abandoned her family, than to look honestly at their own failures. Mostly, though, I did not think about them at all. I was too busy living my life, building my career, maintaining my house, and cultivating friendships with people who actually valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. I joined a book club with some women from my neighborhood. We met once a month, drank wine, discussed books that half of us had not actually finished reading, and laughed about life. It was the first time I had female friendships outside of work, and I realized how much I had been missing. These women knew nothing about my family drama. They knew me as Madison, the woman who always brought homemade cookies to meetings and gave great book recommendations. They judged me on who I was in the present, not on the dysfunction of my past. I started taking a yoga class on Saturday mornings. The instructor was a woman in her 60s who talked about setting boundaries and honoring yourself with the same reverence she discussed downward dog and warrior poses. After class one day, she asked if I was okay. "You seem lighter lately," she said. "Like you've let go of something heavy." "I have," I said. And then, to my own surprise, I told her the whole story. The lawsuit, the favoritism, the years of feeling like I owed my family my success. She listened without judgment, nodded in understanding, and then said something I never forgot. The people who love you don't ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Remember that. A year after the trial, I hosted a small dinner party. Rebecca came along with a few coworkers and neighbors I had gotten to know. We ate homemade lasagna, drank wine, and laughed until my stomach hurt. After everyone left, I stood in my kitchen, washing dishes, and looking out at my backyard where Cooper was chasing fireflies in the gathering darkness. This was what I had worked for. Not just the house or the financial stability, but the peace. The knowledge that I was safe, that my boundaries would be respected, that no one could take from me what I had earned. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was from Chelsea. It was long, rambling, and full of accusations. She claimed I had ruined her life, destroyed our family, and stolen the future she deserved. She said I was selfish, cold, and heartless. She said she would never forgive me. I read through the entire message, felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, and then did something I had never done before. I deleted it without responding. I blocked the number, and I went back to washing my dishes. Chelsea's forgiveness was not something I needed. My parents' approval was not something I required. Their version of family, where love meant sacrifice and support meant enabling dysfunction, was not something I wanted to be part of. I had created my own version of family. Rebecca, who showed up every time I needed help and celebrated every success. Catherine, who had fought for me when my own parents tried to take what I had earned. Uncle Marcus, who called every few months just to check in. Cooper, who greeted me with excitement every single time I came home. My coworkers, who had become genuine friends. The neighbors who waved when I pulled into my driveway and brought over cookies at Christmas. That was family. Not biology or obligation, but choice and mutual respect. I stood on my back patio that evening watching the stars come out over Dallas. The city lights dimmed them somewhat, but you could still see the brightest ones if you looked carefully. My house stood solid behind me, no longer threatened by lawsuits or family manipulation. Every mortgage payment I made was proof that I had built something real, something lasting, something that belonged entirely to me. The girl I had been at 15, working her first job and dreaming of independence, would be proud of where I had ended up. Not just because of the material success, though, that was real and hard-earned, but because I had learned to set boundaries and enforce them. Because I had learned that being capable was not a curse. Because I had learned that sometimes protecting yourself means walking away from people who will never see your worth. People often ask me if I regret how things turned out with my family. They want to know if I wish I had just given Chelsea the house, if avoiding conflict might have been worth maintaining a relationship with my parents. They seem to expect that I should feel guilty about standing my ground, but I don't regret it, not for a single moment. Because giving in would not have maintained our relationship. It would have just established a new pattern where I was expected to sacrifice everything for Chelsea's benefit. It would have taught my parents that they could manipulate me into doing whatever they wanted. It would have destroyed my financial security and my self-respect. Instead, I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You cannot sacrifice your own future to fund someone else's dysfunction. And family is not an excuse for exploitation. The lawsuit, as horrifying as it was, turned out to be a gift in a strange way. It forced me to defend myself publicly, to articulate why I deserved to keep what I had earned, to draw a permanent line in the sand. Before the lawsuit, I might have eventually given in to the pressure. I might have convinced myself that keeping the peace was worth the sacrifice. But after standing in that courtroom and hearing a judge confirm that I was right, that my parents' demands were unreasonable, that I deserved to keep what I had worked for, something shifted. I stopped questioning my own judgment. I stopped wondering if maybe I was being selfish. I stopped carrying guilt that was never mine to carry in the first place. My parents' lawsuit was their final attempt to control me, and it backfired completely. Instead of forcing me to give up my house, it gave me the validation and strength to completely cut them out of my life. Instead of making me feel guilty, it made me realize how much better off I was without their constant manipulation. 6 months after the trial, my parents tried to reach out. They sent a letter, not an apology, but a request for reconciliation. They wanted me to attend a family dinner, to put the past behind us, to move forward as a family. The letter did not acknowledge that they had sued me. It did not apologize for trying to steal my house. It simply suggested that we should all forgive and forget, because that's what families do. I threw the letter away. Forgiveness. I had learned it did not mean allowing people to continue hurting you. It meant letting go of the anger while maintaining the boundaries that kept you safe. I had forgiven my parents in the sense that I was no longer consumed by rage about their behavior. But forgiveness did not mean welcoming them back into my life. Chelsea sent occasional messages over the next year, always from new numbers that I had to keep blocking. She seemed to think that if she just found the right words, she could make me feel guilty enough to give her money or help her in some way. She never quite grasped that our relationship was over, that some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. Meanwhile, my life kept getting better. I got another promotion at work, this time to a senior logistics coordinator position, with a salary that let me max out my retirement accounts and still have money left over for the occasional luxury. I renovated my kitchen, installing the marble countertops I had been dreaming about. I started dating someone, a software engineer named David, who I met through a mutual friend. He was kind, financially responsible, and when I told him about my family situation, he did not try to convince me to reconcile. He just said some families are toxic, and you're smart to protect yourself. On the 2-year anniversary of buying my house, I threw a party. Not a huge event, just 20 or so people who had supported me through the chaos. Rebecca brought champagne. Catherine brought flowers. Uncle Marcus drove 2 hours to attend, bringing his wife and their teenage daughter. David made a toast about strength and independence. Cooper barked at appropriate moments. I stood in my living room, surrounded by people who chose to be in my life, rather than people who felt entitled to control it, and felt genuinely grateful. Not grateful for the lawsuit exactly, but grateful for the clarity it had brought. Grateful for the way it had forced me to stand up for myself. Grateful for the knowledge that I was strong enough to defend what I had built. 3 years after the trial, I heard through Uncle Marcus that my parents were struggling financially. Apparently, Chelsea had racked up substantial debt again, and they had drained their savings to cover it. They were considering selling their house to pay off her credit cards. Uncle Marcus asked in a careful way that suggested he already knew the answer if I would be willing to help them. I said no. Not with anger or satisfaction, just a simple, firm no. My parents had made their choices. They had prioritized Chelsea's wants over my needs my entire life. They had sued me in an attempt to steal my house. They had never apologized, never acknowledged that they had done anything wrong. I owed them nothing. Uncle Marcus said he understood. He told me he had given them the same message, that they needed to stop enabling Chelsea and let her face the consequences of her choices. He said my father had been furious, but my mother had cried and admitted that maybe they had made mistakes. Maybe, but not definitely. Not enough to apologize or change. I wished them well in a general, distant way. I hoped they figured out their finances. I hoped Chelsea eventually grew up and took responsibility for her own life. But their problems were no longer my problems. I had my own life to live, my own future, to build my own happiness to protect. Now, 4 years after buying my house, I can say with absolute certainty that I made the right choice. My house has increased in value by 20%. I have a healthy retirement account, an emergency fund that could cover 6 months of expenses, and a career I actually enjoy. I'm in a serious relationship with someone who respects my boundaries and supports my independence. I have friendships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. And I have something else, something harder to quantify, but just as important. I have self-respect. I have the knowledge that I stood up for myself when it mattered most. I have proof that I am strong enough to protect what I have built, even when the people trying to take it are my own family. The house is more than just walls and a roof now. It's a symbol of everything I overcame to get here. Every time I pull into my driveway, I remember the 15-year-old girl working at a fast food restaurant and dreaming of independence. Every time I make a mortgage payment, I remember standing in that courtroom while a judge confirmed I had the right to keep what I had earned. Every time I sit on my back patio with Cooper curled up at my feet, I remember choosing myself over people who would never appreciate the sacrifice. Some people will always think I should have given in. That family is worth any sacrifice, that keeping the peace is more important than protecting yourself. Those people have never experienced the suffocating weight of a family that sees you as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be valued. They have never felt the constant pressure to dim your own light so others can shine brighter. They have never been punished for succeeding, blamed for being responsible, or guilted for having boundaries. When people tell me I should reconcile with my family, I ask them a simple question. If a friend treated you the way my family treated me, would you maintain that friendship? The answer is always no. Somehow the word family is supposed to override all logic, all self-preservation, all common sense. We're taught that blood is thicker than water, that family comes first, that you should forgive and forget, because that's what good people do. But nobody tells you what to do when your family is the source of your pain. Nobody tells you that it's okay to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share DNA. Nobody tells you that choosing yourself over toxic family members is not betrayal, it's survival. I learned a hard lesson through all of this. Love is not supposed to hurt. Real love does not demand sacrifice that destroys you. Real love celebrates your success instead of resenting it. Real love respects your boundaries instead of testing them constantly. Support is not supposed to require you to destroy your own future. Real support lifts you up without tearing others down. Real support celebrates independence instead of fostering dependence. Real support respects your choices even when they're different from what others would choose. Family is not an excuse for abuse or manipulation or exploitation. Family should be your safe place, not your battlefield. Family should be your biggest cheerleaders, not your harshest critics. Family should respect the word no without punishment or guilt trips. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who will never see your worth. Walking away is not failure. Staying in a relationship that destroys you, that's failure. Walking away is not weakness. Letting people abuse you because they're family, that's weakness. Walking away is not selfish. Sacrificing your well-being for people who will never appreciate it, that's what's truly wasteful. My parents sued me for buying a house with my own money. The judge called their lawsuit ridiculous and made them pay my legal fees. They never apologized, never admitted they were wrong, never stopped playing the victim in their own narrative. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I don't need their approval or their apology. I don't need them to understand why I made the choice I made. I don't need anything from them at all, because I have everything I need right here, in this house that I fought to keep, in this life that I built on my own terms, in this future that belongs entirely to me. That's the real revenge. Not the judge's verdict, though. That certainly felt good. The real revenge is living well, building a life so full and satisfying that the people who tried to tear you down become irrelevant, creating happiness so genuine that their attempts at manipulation become nothing more than occasional annoyances, easily blocked and forgotten. I won that lawsuit 4 years ago. But the real victory happened gradually over the years that followed, every time I chose myself, every time I maintained my boundaries, every time I refused to feel guilty for protecting what I had earned. If you're dealing with a toxic family, if you're being pressured to sacrifice your future for someone else's dysfunction, if you're wondering whether you're being selfish for wanting to keep what you've worked for, let me tell you something. You're not selfish. You're not wrong. You're not cruel. You're protecting yourself. And that is not just your right, it's your responsibility. My name is Madison Parker. 4 years ago, my parents sued me for buying a house. The judge dismissed their case and made them pay my legal fees. And today, I'm sitting on my back patio, in my house living my best life with absolutely zero regrets. That's my story. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Drop a comment below if you've dealt with similar family drama. Hit that subscribe button for more real-life stories. And remember, choosing yourself is not selfish. It's survival. Thanks for watching.